Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that's quietly happening right under the surface of our economy. You probably aren't seeing it plastered across the front pages, but man, it is deeply, deeply affecting millions of households. We're talking about America's hidden credit card debt crisis.
So it all starts with this massive paradox, and frankly, it confuses a lot of people. How can the economy look so incredibly strong on paper while so many folks around us, maybe even you, are feeling so much financial stress? I mean, the stock market is hitting record highs, unemployment is super low, and yet millions of people are quietly losing sleep over money.
To wrap our heads around this disconnect, we really have to look past the myth of those booming macroeconomic headlines. Sure, traditional metrics look absolutely fantastic, but when you step away from Wall Street and look at everyday households, the reality totally shifts. We are going to unpack exactly why so many everyday people are finding themselves relying on credit cards, literally just to survive.
You know, when we hear the phrase debt crisis, our minds usually jump straight to like a catastrophic housing crash or a sudden bank collapse, right? But the truth is, this particular crisis begins completely under the radar. Most financial crises start super quietly. It's just one missed payment, or maybe a tiny unexpected emergency, or just a single month where your income doesn't quite stretch to cover the basics.
And it's absolutely crucial to understand what's actually driving this shortfall. Over the last couple of years, the cost of just basic necessities has squeezed us from every single angle. Food costs more. Rent is up, insurance, utilities, you name it. And because wages just haven't kept pace with these sharp increases, everyday people are essentially being forced to fill that widening gap with plastic. Let's put a human face on this, because it makes it so much clearer. Let's think about someone named Sarah. She's a professional making a decent salary. She hasn't changed her lifestyle at all. Literally nothing changed. Yet suddenly, she's spending hundreds more just to maintain her baseline. Month 1, she puts a slightly higher grocery bill on the card. Month 3, a random medical bill pops up. Month 6, her car needs a repair. By month 12, Sarah is suddenly carrying thousands of dollars in debt. And this shift right here highlights exactly why the situation is so alarming. Historically, credit cards were basically tools of convenience, right? You'd use them for optional spending, maybe booking a vacation, or buying a luxury item. But today, they've totally transformed into critical financial lifelines. When people are putting basic survival, food, gas, electricity on a credit card, well, that is a massive blinking red warning sign for the broader economy. Which brings us to a number that is just truly staggering: 20%. What makes relying on these cards so incredibly dangerous right now is the cost of borrowing. Credit card interest rates have skyrocketed to extreme levels, with many easily topping 20%. And honestly, a lot of them are even higher. That completely destroys the math for families who are desperately trying to dig themselves out. Think about it like this. If you're holding a $10,000 balance at that 20% rate, that debt is generating thousands of dollars in interest alone. You could be incredibly responsible, paying your minimums every single month without fail, but a huge chunk of that cash goes strictly toward interest. You become trapped on what we call the invisible treadmill. You know the feeling. You're sweating, you're putting in all this work, but you haven't moved an inch.
And being stuck on that treadmill, it inevitably leads to a very real psychological condition that economists call debt fatigue. At first, you track every single penny, but after months of this grinding stress, the emotional exhaustion just takes over. People become so incredibly overwhelmed that they stop checking their balances altogether. They delay dealing with it, basically because confronting the reality is simply too painful.
It's so vital to remember that nobody wakes up one morning and thinks, hey, I'm going to bury myself in debt today. Financial problems develop gradually. Because this trap is built through tiny, accumulating decisions over time, our own psychology makes it way too easy to underestimate the danger. It happens so slowly that by the time you realize you're stuck, the walls have already closed in. Okay, so let's zoom out for a second to look at the broader economic threat. You might be wondering, if I don't personally have credit card debt, why should I even care? Well, economists monitor household debt as a huge indicator of macroeconomic risk. We're talking about the engine that drives the entire country's economy. See, consumer spending drives roughly 70% of the American economy. It's this self-sustaining loop that we're all pretty familiar with. Consumers spend money, which fuels business growth, which drives hiring, which generates more income for workers. When it functions correctly, running on actual wages, it's a beautiful machine.
But here is where the threat lies. What happens when all that spending is increasingly funded by expensive debt instead of actual real income? Because credit limits aren't infinite. When consumers finally hit that wall, they pull the emergency brake hard. They spend less, travel less, hold off on major purchases, and when millions of households do this all at exactly the same time, overall economic growth just slams to a halt.
Now, we can't just talk about the big picture macroeconomics without acknowledging the hidden personal toll. Beyond the threat to the GDP, there is a severe mental health crisis brewing here. Carrying thousands in debt while you're trying to raise kids and manage a career, it creates an enormous emotional burden. We're talking direct links to anxiety, depression, sleep problems, and some really intense relationship conflicts.
Because ultimately, guys, this isn't just an economic story. It's a human story. Money problems absolutely do not stay neatly organized on a spreadsheet. They follow you. They follow people into their homes, into their workplaces, into their marriages. And that is exactly what makes understanding this dynamic so absolutely critical. So what happens next? Are we guaranteed to see a massive financial disaster? Well, actually, no, not necessarily. Economies are super complex, and a bunch of factors could completely change the trajectory. Maybe income growth improves, inflation cools down, or consumers aggressively pivot to paying down their debt. But while a crash isn't guaranteed, as long as debt is growing faster than income, these risks are just going to keep building beneath the surface. And that brings us to the core message of this explainer. The real challenge here isn't simply the sheer dollar amount that people owe. No, the challenge is why they owe that money. When everyday families are pressured into using high-interest debt just to cover the basics, rather than using it for luxuries, it signals a really profound, underlying pressure in our society. This shift, it might honestly be the most significant economic story of our time.
Which leads me to a question I want to leave you with. Have rising prices fundamentally altered your financial decisions over the past couple of years? Do you think this hidden credit card crisis is the next great economic trap? Or will macroeconomic strength eventually pull everyday Americans out of the red? It's a really complex puzzle, but seeing the real economy starts with asking the right questions. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep looking beyond